this morning in the car, I'm listening to the radio, and as I turn it on, the broadcasters are speaking to the Israeli assistant ambassador to Morocco. And you hear in his voice such an excitement, such a joy, as if we are all sharing in this. Do you know what he was feeling this joy for? Anybody?
The win at the World Cup.
Good for you. So you don't just know about food, Marlene.
No.
Morocco at the World Cup, the first ever Arab soccer team to reach the quarterfinals.
Right.
But he was sensing the joy, and those people who are in Morocco out on the streets singing. But what struck me is how he was saying it, feeling very much a part of it, and passing that feeling on to here. And we hope those kinds of feelings will continue.
Did you hear the rest of it about the Palestinian flag in Morocco?
No, go ahead. You're going to bring
No.
us down?
No, you can read about it later. That's it. That's it. Very unfortunate.
As long as you said that, I don't know if I'm going to remember there was a request going around for a young boy from, whether he's from Hebron or Gaza, who needs a kidney transplant. And he's in, what's the name of the children's hospital that you would bring people from?
Schneider.
Schneider. They're the only ones set up together with some doctors from, I think, Czechoslovakia, but it cost $250,000 or shekel, I don't remember, doesn't matter. But they're looking for people to contribute from here. Why? Because the Palestinian Authority will not contribute. So that says that. Anyway, Toronto lost one of its, I believe, maybe old-fashioned, but finest educators on Sunday. I worked closely with Rabbi Pinchas Brumer at Associated, and he had been ill for a while, and I zoomed in on the funeral on Monday, and seeing the various people from my experience at Associated gathered there was very emotional. But one thing I want to say about him, because it isn't just what academically I learned from him or professionally, but a very traditional man. And I remember before Batya was on the scene, spending a Shabbat at his home, a lovely wife and 2 daughters. And you know what they say, how you best learn from a teacher isn't necessarily frontally and seeing them in a classroom, but actually seeing them in action and sitting around his Shabbos table and seeing how loving he was with his daughters and his Eshet Chayil. That's something I'll always remember. So,
Bracha, I had
yes, Esther.
a memory to share. When I first came to Canada, I came to Montreal, and a guy by the name of Magid was in charge of all the Jewish schools in the Montreal area.
Yes.
And so he asked me which grade you want. I said, give me grade 1. When he came to visit, he saw me teaching phonetics. So he didn't say anything, but then at recess time, he said, you know, we don't teach phonetics anymore. So I said to him, Dr. Maggie, did you ever teach grade 1? He said, no. I said, give me till Hanukkah. And if you're not pleased, because I mix the two, then I do it your way. And he was so nice about it. He said, came and P.S. after Hanukkah, they all taught phonetics. But he was a guy who was open-minded. It's not, this is the way we do it, and that's it. And so I always remember that.
No, you lucked out.
Can I make a comment, Bracha?
Yes, Elliot?
Yes, I'm thinking, I often, as you get older, and you think about the people who are instrumental in helping you educationally and spiritually, and you realize that they're no longer on the planet, they're with Hashem. I have very clear images of both my Jewish and non-Jewish instructors who had a real impact on me. And I just, it's so beautiful to be able to look back and think of how they monitored you, cared about you, and supported you. And not just their intellectual or academic depth, but the degree to which you view them as mensches. That's
Absolutely.
something very special. The problem as you get older, more and more of them are called by Hashem. And so we have those memories. There's a book, I don't know if anybody online read it, called Tuesday at Maury's. I forget the name of the person who wrote it. This is actually, it might have been, anyhow, I think this man married a Jewish woman, and he was
Mitch
bemoaning,
Albom.
Mitch
observed
Albom, right.
yeah, he kind of observed her decline. A very emotionally moving book, and I could only read a good part of it. It was too gut-wrenchingly emotional for me to finish it, but it shows how important the long-term impact of people who have helped you along the way. That's
what it's all about. Certainly. Thank you, Elliot. And my last, before we officially begin, somebody please mute yourself. I mentioned before that the last few months I've begun going regularly to this little minyan called the Klausner Minyan. And it is considered halachically egalitarian. Women do everything, which is different from Shira Chadasha, where women still only do what isn't Divrei Kedusha. Anyway, and if the Torah is taken out from the man's side, so the man walks with it, because there is a machitza. There is a machitza. We don't have to go into why. There are reasons for that. But it's a see-through and everyone is on the same level. So the man walks with the Torah and then hands it to a woman, and she walks on it with it around the women's section. But women daven everything, Kriyat Torah, Gabayim, etc., etc. So 3 things this past Shabbat. In fact, the man who was davening Musaf, when he took the Torah, he walked to the women's section and he handed it to his wife. And there was something nice about that. Then, a very nice touch, the Gabbai, during the Torah reading, when he makes a Mishabera for Aliyah,
Sorry.
he customizes it to the person. If the person is having the Aliyah for a special reason, whatever, and it's very clear. So this Shabbat, there was a young woman who became engaged. So she had an Aliyah, he made a Mishaberach, and everybody, of course, sang. And then there was another couple that said a special Mishaberach for their son who had an Aliyah, who was going into the army this week. And it occurred to me that all of these personal celebrations, moments of hope for the soldier, that there's something special about the fact that these private life cycle events are connected to something greater by having it acknowledged in shul. And I find that very comforting, that we go through our individual events all within a group. So it struck me as I was sitting there on Shabbat. Okay, so interestingly, the parsha that we're going to read this week, Vayishlach, is a good segue into our topic as we look at Hanukkah for the next few weeks. So you recall that Yaakov had run away, fearful of Esav, and now many years later, leaving Lavan's house, he is going to have a reunion with Esav. And there's certain anxieties. Do you remember, even though we haven't read it yet, what the three things are that Yaakov does in preparation for this reunion? Almost, well, if this is what happens, then I'll do this. Different strategies of what possibly might happen when the two of them are on their way to meeting. Anybody?
Well, for sure, he divides the family up into groups. And
Okay,
he sends gifts in various groupings.
okay. Which does he do first?
He
You've
sends
left
the
out,
gifts. He
he
sends the,
sends the gifts second, and he divides the group into two last as a preparation, as a last resort in case they will have to fight, and he wants
then
to
he-
protect.
And then he prays.
Okay, Esther, yes. He prays first, almost as if it's a spiritual approach, and saying he doesn't totally rely on himself. And he says a very interesting phrase, katonti, from
Yeah.
the word katan.
Mhm.
I know that I am too small to expect any further gifts from you, God, but please help me out here, because he is anxious. And then he sends the gifts, optimistic that that will pacify and things will fall into place. But he's still not sure. And so, as Beth said, he divides the camp. Now, let me share my screen. And we can already begin to think of how this might connect with the story of Hanukkah. There is a mixed perspective on the approach that some of the Jews took during the time that they were battling the Greeks.
Mhm.
And Yaakov's strategies perhaps symbolize the fact that it's not just then. Ramban said when Yaakov, Nachmanides, was thinking of these three approaches, he was being very realistic. And that's not just something of the past, but something to be put into action, certainly in Nachmanides' times, and we believe today. For that's why we still study the Torah, to see precedents. And so some felt, we know, that it's time to give up and join the Greeks. Others felt we are going to survive. Maybe we will assimilate. Or others We are going to survive, remain different, but it's not going to be just by being different spiritually, and hence the Maccabees who said we have to fight. Now, we're not known to be fighters. That was not something, certainly not while we were in exile. We were known to be passive, and it was easy to be, not really easy, certainly during World War II, but because we didn't have our own army, we developed that kind of mentality of being passive. But if we go back to the Maccabean time, we see that there was a time that we had to be strong, perhaps as a last resort, but we had to be strong.
I see something positive in that period, because it's the first time that you see the amalgamation of secular and religious education. Because some of the people did keep their Judaism and their Torah study, but they embraced the philosophy or whatever it is that they got from the Greek. And I see a positive move in that.
Definitely. For those who maintain their Yiddishkeit, of course, we believe in taking the best from other cultures. And we will talk about that one of the coming weeks. So I'd like to look at what I've called the rabbinic versus the Maccabean orientations to Hanukkah. And we're going to go through this by looking at some of the texts that we're familiar with that we recite on Hanukkah. The Al Hanisim is something that we say, one for Purim and one for Hanukkah, and we say it in the Amidah and in the Birkat Hamazon. So as we like to do, as I like to do, we're going to read closely. And I already want you to keep in mind that we're looking to see what is the focus of the Al Hanisim, which was the first text about Hanukkah. What's being discussed here? What's being expressed? And then we're going to compare that with the Gemara from the Talmud that was written later. Okay, I'm going to read the Hebrew and then the English for us to have a sense of, but the Hebrew a little faster. V'al hanisim, v'al hapurkan, v'al hagvurot, v'al hatshuot, v'al hamilchamot she'asita lavotenu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. And for the miracles, and for the wonders, and for the mighty deeds, and for the salvations, and for the victories that you wrought for our ancestors in their days and in this day. Bimei Matityahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Chashmonai uvanav ksha'amda malchut Yavan harsha'a al amcha Yisrael, la'ashkicham toratecha le'aviram mechukei ritzonecha. In the days of Matityahu, son of Yochanan, high priest, the Chashmonian and his sons, when the evil kingdom of Greece stood against your people Israel in order to make them forget your Torah and violate your laws. Ve'ata b'rachamecha harabim amadata lahem be'et saratam, ravta et rivam, danta et dinam, nakamta et nikmatam. You in your enormous mercy stood up for them in their time of great need. You upheld their cause, judged their case, and avenged their oppressors. Masarta giborim biyad chalashim, v'rabim biyad ma'atim, utmeim biyad torim, u'rsha'im biyad tzadikim, v'zeidim biyad oskei toratecha. You, God, delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and the degenerates into the hands of those who cling to your Torah. Ulecha asita shem gadol v'kadosh ba'olamecha, ule'amcha Yisrael asita tshuwa gdola, ufurkan kayom hazeh. And you made for yourself a great and holy name in your world, and performed a great salvation and miracle for your people Israel, as you do today. V'achar ken ba'u vanecha lidvir beitecha, ufinu et hechalecha v'tiaru et mikdashcha, v'idlik nerot b'chatzrot kadshecha, v'kavu shmonat yemei Chanukkah, elu lahodot ulahalel l'shimcha gadol. And afterward, your children came to the Holy of Holies in your house, and they cleansed your palace and purified your temple, and they kindled lights in the courtyard of your sanctuary, and they established these 8 days of Hanukkah to give thanks and to praise your great name. What are we being told? Stephen, your hand's up.
We've got two time frames here, two separate time frames. One is the past of the tragedies that befell our ancestors, and one is the present. Very little is talked about the present. And then the actions that Hashem is taking based on mostly on what occurred previously, generations ago. So it seems a bit confusing, but it isn't. If you read it very carefully, you can sort out what happened and when what happened and what God did at that time.
Okay. The two most important words that you just said were what God did.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anybody else?
Bracha,
That he talks
it's-
like,
Brenda.
it strikes me that it talks about God's support and so on, but it doesn't talk at all about what we talk about, which is the miracle of the lights after the reconstruction of the temple.
Exactly. That cruse of oil.
but
Nowhere do you see that mentioned.
Yeah, I see something else that
Go ahead.
it takes a combination of God's work plus ours, because "V'achar kach ba'u banecha," that then God helped us, but we had to help ourselves. And
Very interesting, Esther. Let's take a look at that, because my sense was that in this first rabbinic text, they are putting the focus on God's actions and are, in fact, as Brenda said, leaving out the cruse of oil. But what you just said is that you're saying that people had involvement. Even you have to read very closely for that, because you're saying the fact that the children came back to the Holy of Holies in your house.
Yeah.
Okay, now keep that in mind, because I'm going to want to say to that, that's still a little different from what's going to be the Maccabean orientation, okay? Because the people coming here, what is their action? They're doing something in the Holy of Holies, okay? Which is a fine thing to do, okay? Now let's see how this is different from the later text. What is the reason for Hanukkah? For our rabbis taught, on the 25th of Kislev commence the days of Hanukkah, which are 8 on which a lamentation for the dead and fasting are forbidden. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled the oils therein, and when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed against and defeated them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil with the seal of the high priest, but which contains sufficient oil for one day's lighting only. Yet a miracle occurred, and they lit the lamp for 8 days. The following year, these days were appointed a festival with the recital of Hallel and thanksgiving. Okay, what is the major difference between this text in the Gemara and what we've read here?
The mention of the oil was not mentioned before.
Okay, so on the one hand, you have the oil, but in the Gemara, the emphasis is just put on the cruse of oil, whereas in the Al Hanisim, it talks about the Maccabees and how, yes, God was there helping them, but it talks about the military victories. Okay, now, why this discrepancy? You would think that two Talmudic rabbinic texts would have the same emphasis. Why one on the military, the Maccabees, even if it states that God is behind their success, and then the other, the later rabbis, are putting their entire focus on the miracle of the oil. Before we go on and we share another rabbi's interpretation of this, anybody want to suggest why there was hesitation?
Could it be because later on the rabbis were disappointed in the Hashmonaim?
Okay, that is one reason. Yeah, they were. They did not feel that they were committed enough to the values, the real important values of Yiddishkeit.
Yeah,
I'm
That could
thinking
be.
that,
Go ahead, Bev.
I'm thinking that they didn't want to encourage fighting. And at the time, I guess it was a different, there were the Romans there, and perhaps they didn't want a revolution against the Romans, so they were emphasizing the cruse of oil rather than the military victory.
and
Very
also,
good.
also
Okay.
that in the Torah we have a separation politically between the Kohen and the king. Yet one of the Hashmonaim, who was a Kohen, called himself a king. So this is a contradiction, plus the fact that he wasn't anointed, because a king, according to Jewish religion, must be anointed by a Kohen.
Yes. Okay, so the two reasons that you've given, yes, and now I'd like to look at a third. A Rabbi Elisha Friedman writes, the omission is staggering. She's saying she doesn't understand why the miracle of the oil isn't mentioned in the first. There was a second miracle on Hanukkah when one jar of oil, enough for one day, burnt for 8. That's why we light the menorah. So why does the holiday's primary prayer, the Al Hanisim, omit any mention of this miracle? It's like writing a prayer for Pesach without the 10 plagues. A cynic might even say that the military victory wasn't a miracle at all. Maybe the Jews were just better strategists or more passionate on the battlefield, right? Just like in the 6-Day War, some people will say it was a miracle. But what does that mean about the dedicated soldiers that fought it? Or do we say it's a combination?
Could it be a symbolic like Sukkot, for example? I can see the 8 days of Sukkot that symbolizes something for us. And so the 8 days of Hanukkah to symbolize.
Okay, there is a theory like that, without getting off now, that there is a similarity between Hanukkah and Sukkot, yes. Okay. How often do people, we'll get back to this, look at when an army succeeds or fights and sees victory, look at that as a miracle, a real miracle. Do people these days look at it like that? Or do
Sure.
they just base it on,
Sure, the Six-Day War is looked upon as a miracle.
okay, and today, anybody else? Which would you sooner look at as a miracle? The oil lasting when it could only last for one day, or the battle? And forget about if you don't believe in miracles at this hour.
Well-
You know what, Bracha? I really think that the writing speaks to what the people needed at the time.
Go ahead.
The first writing is earlier. They were still feeling strong, but perhaps we're moving away from giving God the credit that God was due in the military victory. By the time you come to the second writing, they are a people who are under the Romans' thumb. They are probably looking to God, but the way it was much easier for them to consider the miracle of the oil at that time in the people's own psyche than to consider the military victory as a miracle, because that wasn't going to happen again. But the fact that they could symbolically refer back to the oil could happen, and very easily for them to connect them with what had happened in the past.
By the
Very
way,
interesting.
by the
Very
way,
interesting.
Hannah, it really does take 8 days to get the oil out of the olives, because I made that experiment with my class way back in Israel. It took 8 days. We took the olives, these Israeli olives, and we crushed them, and we got the oil after 8 days. So it really takes 8 days to create new oil.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's see what Marlene just suggested is touched upon a little bit differently as we continue. Listen to what she suggests. When we celebrate a holiday, okay, let me remind you of the question, why don't we mention the oil in Al-Hanisim? Why just the victory? I shouldn't just say just the military victory. Again, when we celebrate a holiday, we look for the exciting and the unusual. It is the supernatural which captures our attention, not the mundane. The commonplace does not deserve a holiday. And so we celebrate Hanukkah as the anniversary of a supernatural miracle by lighting the menorah. But the act of prayer, and that's what Al-Hanisim is fundamentally different. And this says something way beyond just Hanukkah. It is a celebration of the routine, of the usual, of God's gifts which surround us daily. That's the point of prayer, not to just pray when something exciting has happened, but as soon as we wake up, Modani, and we thank God for an apple. We thank God for having successfully used the washroom. The mundane. In prayer, we don't look for the once in a lifetime miraculous event to praise and thank God. We look to thousands of small things with which He has blessed us: breathing air, going to the bathroom, eating food, the ability to hear and seek and speak, to love and maintain friendships, to think and to read. All these are mundane activities, yet according to Jewish tradition, they demand the utmost gratitude to God. To thank God only for the supernatural is an insult to the millions of everyday kindnesses He performs. Winning a war against those bent on destroying one's way of life demands gratitude, but it is not a celebration. War is always unpleasant, even if one wins. It involves the loss of life and inflicting suffering on others. It is a moment to soberly reflect on the tremendous blessings surrounding us, including the painful and difficult victory over our enemies. The authors of Al Hanisim exclude the oil miracle as if to say, now we are praying, thanking God for his goodness and the blessing he bestows on us. This decision suggests a larger truth about the act of prayer. When we pray, we are thanking God for those things that, while not as flashy as the miracle of the oil, are nevertheless crucial to our freedom and well-being. Now, when you read this, Rabbi Friedman,
Beautiful.
it's coming out sounding, yes, it is beautiful that she's really, and this is what I called this session, putting Al Hanisim as a reflection of the human being fighting and it not being miraculous because we are fighting, but we definitely should not forget to thank God for allowing us to succeed at this. Let that be clear. We know that at times where we're successful, we very often forget to thank God. Now, but it still can be seen as a miracle. But the point here is that God needed human beings, the Maccabees, and all of us today in our various ways of fighting in the various ways, whether militarily or otherwise.
To me, it's spiritual.
What do you mean?
When I look at the candles and the lighting of the candles, it does something to the spirit.
Okay. Now that doesn't mean we believe that the spirit and the real dedication of the Maccabees and of the Six-Day War soldiers and others are what give them the strength to be able to fight armies that are perhaps bigger than ours. So there is something about the spirit for sure. So these two texts, both very traditional, put emphasis, one on looking at the miracle and one on looking at the need for the human involvement. Anyone else want to-
Bracha,
Yeah,
those things we take for granted, of course, people begin to appreciate when they become more challenging, and they themselves, the ability to walk, to talk, to think, to remember, all of those things are very complex neurologically, and maybe they also are kinds of miracles.
no, that's exactly what she's saying. Certain things we take for granted and we shouldn't. The ordinary deserves a thank you. It isn't just the extraordinary. Of course, that grasps our attention, but now it might seem a little strange though, because you don't want to think about war as being, taken for granted, and we should still thank God for this. But I bring this.
Yeah, but I think throughout Torah, the emphasis is really on things that we do regularly, not now and then only. You pray 3 times a day, you do the blessing, something that it is kavua, that you do again and again and again and again. Those are the things that Torah emphasizes, more than the ones that we do once or twice a year.
Yes. Okay. Now, this trend of thought can be seen in later texts. We're all familiar with Mi Yimalel Gvurot Israel. Now, this is the modern version written by Menashe Ravina, and we'll compare it to what's said in the book of Tehillim. Who can retell the mighty deeds of Israel? Who can count them? In every generation, a hero will arise, a redeemer for the people. Listen, in those days, in this time, the Maccabee saves and redeems, and in our day, the whole people of Israel will join together and rise and be redeemed. And what do we have in Tehillim? Hallelujah. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. Now again, who can express the mighty acts? But it's the mighty acts of the Lord, or make all his praise to be heard. From Tehillim. Why was there a need for the modern version? Is it surprising? No, because these were written back in the time that we talked about a few weeks ago by pioneers, and who had this need to take control and put emphasis on the fact that they were no longer passive. And these became names, in fact, of youth groups here. The Maccabees, Hapoel, Hashmonaim, and used them as a model for standing up. And another very popular song at the time, still sung today, Anu nosim lapidim, we carry torches. We carry torches in the foggy nights, the paths shine under our feet, and anyone whose heart thirsts for light will lift up his eyes and come to us. To the light he will come. A miracle did not happen for us. We found no container of oil. We walked to the valley and climbed the mountain. We discovered the springs of hidden light. A miracle did not happen for us. We found no container of oil. We quarried in the rock until we bled, and there was light. Now, what do you think of that? How is that different from the Miyam Alel, even the modern Miyam Alel?
Well, the first Miyam Alel doesn't give the person's effort to find the light. It was given to them.
Okay, so
Because
this
I
is,
think of the
yes,
second one makes me think of Plato's Republic and the light that came at the end of the tunnel.
Yafeh. Nice, okay. What else? We had to do something to attain the light. Okay, anything else strike you? Who can retell? Who can count them? In every generation, a hero will arise, a redeemer for the people. Listen, in those days, in this time, the Maccabee saves and redeems. And in our day, the whole people of Israel will join together and rise and be redeemed. And here, isn't there?
There isn't, Bracha, there isn't a sense of a leader arising. It's like everybody.
Okay, that is one point, that it's making it a collective, and it stresses a miracle did not happen for us. And it says that a few times, that there's a certain negativity, almost. Now, some have read this. You can read it in two ways. That we did this, there wasn't a miracle, or they're saying we couldn't rely on a miracle. We needed to do this. Now, how would that be response to Europeans, if I might put it that way?
Bracha,
I
I
think
wonder
there's-
if you can carry this to an extreme and say that ultimately, if people are empowered to do for themselves, that empowerment was given by Hashem, along with the miracle of the 8 days. So carrying it to a broader way of interpreting it, one might say that all is what Hashgacha approach, all is empowered by the divine.
Okay,
Yeah,
And
empowered by divine, but needs your effort.
and
Like
we believe that that is the perspective, that God wants us to be seen as his partners.
Mhm.
And what keeps us going is the sense of feeling we have a beyond purpose,
Bracha.
that it's divine. And that
Yes.
doesn't mean that we just sit back and rely on God. That's the point of this. You can bring these two together.
Isn't the
If the oil is a symbol of a miracle, that we all need the inspiration.
Isn't
You
the-
know,
is the simple sentence "Ein Kemach, Ein Torah" will apply here too? Because you have to make an effort. You can't just
Yeah.
sit-
Okay, yes, you can use it somehow. You need
just
to have
thinking,
this. Beth,
I'm just thinking that in here, you're also trying to appeal to those who are secular.
oh,
Because,
for sure, for
you know,
sure.
because, you know, for those who don't accept the miracles, you know, and I'm almost thinking here, we quarried in the rock until we bled. It was not only in Israel, it was also in the Shoah.
a lot of
Excellent. Of course, they're trying to appeal. And remember that the Sabra here is embarrassed by those who bled in Europe, feeling that they allow that to happen to them. Now, they can't judge. They can't judge because the circumstance is so different, but definitely these modern texts are a result of reactions, very reactionary to what they were familiar with. And they are trying now to go back to the Hashmonim and the Maccabim that the rabbis were a little afraid of.
Yeah.
And they were afraid that the Maccabees also would maybe be fighting to be strong, but are they going to maintain the soul? Somebody else wanted to say something.
Bracha, I get a feeling in the second one that what they're saying is really, there's a great disappointment in the fact that they feel that God did not intervene for them in the Shoah. And they're saying, God's not here for us, and if we don't do this ourselves, it's not going to happen.
And who can judge them for feeling that way? You know, it's interesting. Some people came out of the Shoah still feeling strong believers, and others who didn't, but there were some who then dedicated their lives to being Jewish educators. Yeah. But it's a very rich text here. We carry the torches. Yeah. Okay, now, certainly a theme of both orientations, though, is bravery. Now, what do I mean by that? To me, the real miracle of the oil was the fact that they returned to the Beit HaMikdash and were willing to light that candle again. You know, maybe they could have said, no, we're done. But they were dedicated to survival. And we'll talk about a few types of bravery now. Whether it's the bravery spiritually or militarily. So Rav Benny Lau, a wonderful rabbi teacher in the Jerusalem Israel community. There is a bravery that relies on the Cruse of oil tradition, the tradition of that ancient stubborn Judaism, which continues to light candles year after year, indifferent to the exigencies of time. Even in the deepest darkness, the Jew can find the small jug of oil. This is the power of survival. I mean, Marlene just brought up people from the Holocaust could have been, on the one hand, angry with God, and yet you hear stories of remarkable stories of people being aware of the calendar and them wanting to improvise and create a menorah. So somebody steals a spoon and somebody steals like butter or margarine from the kitchen, and they make wicks. So, you know, it's incredible. On the one hand, you can be angry, and here are people who want to create a Jewish ritual. There is also bravery, which draws on the Hashmonean tradition of fighting and the celebration of independence. This is the bravery of those who refuse to be subject to the kindness of others. They want their independence, and who are willing to give up their lives in order to be sovereign in their land. This is an active bravery driven by the sense of an earthly mission. Now, why do you think he needs to end that by saying an active bravery driven by the sense of an earthly mission?
Because I think in the beginning, the Greeks it was only a political demand of the Jews. But later on, it became a religious demand, and that's when they rebelled. Because there were two stages. Originally, it was only a political demand, except the Greek culture. But
okay, yes, but I'm asking, why did Rav Lau here call for this active bravery, says that it's driven, motivated by the sense of an earthly mission?
Because the religion
You
to
can't
me
just
is
wait
the
for
earthly
God.
mission. The religion is the earthly mission. That's the way I read him.
Okay,
But I would
Rahama?
also say,
No, I
Bracha, we're
said-
also looking at secular people who are driven by, they want to save the state of Israel as the state of Israel. And it's not necessarily a religiously driven, but politically motivated.
But I
Yeah.
also think that a Rav Lau is also bringing forth the ideology of there is ma'asim, and you have to fight in the army, and you have to do, and not just wait for God to do. And that's why it's an earthly mission, and not just to wait for heavens to take over and bring
Yeah.
forth the land.
And isn't that the irony in that the pioneers who came and created the land rejected the tradition, but they come to create this land that is very much a part of our tradition. Complicated.
Rafa,
Complicated.
isn't that the beauty of the Rav Kook, who was Orthodox?
Yes,
But
absolutely.
he welcomed the
Yes.
Chalutzim.
Yeah.
He said, we
he
need
knew
them.
that they were needed.
Yeah, we need them.
Now, Rabbi David Hartman, Zichrono Livracha, writes of another type of bravery. And all of us are brave in the sense that we live with uncertainty in whatever aspect of our lives. Keep that in mind when I say that some of the values that we're talking about today go beyond, I said this earlier, just Hanukkah. The miracle of the first day was expressed in the community's willingness to light a small cruse of oil without reasonable assurance that their efforts would be sufficient to complete the rededication of the temple. They had no assurance. Hanukkah celebrates the miracle expressed by those who lit the lamp, and not only the miracle of the lamps continued burning for 8 days. what I said earlier. The fact that somebody was willing to do it, that's more of a miracle, more of a significant miracle to me. That you still had somebody willing to go ahead. And there are all kinds of scenes today, whether it's a person who's sick, who's still willing to fight the fight, or whatever situation. The miracle of Jewish spiritual survival throughout its history of wandering and oppression may best be described by our people's strength to live without guarantees of success and to focus on how to begin a process without knowledge of how it would end. Uncertainty of success often paralyzes one's initiative to act. We know that about human nature.
Yeah.
Right? But you're not going to know unless you actually begin. That's real hope. Human initiative is undermined by the rationalization that since completion of the task in question is not assured, there is no point making the required effort to begin. Now, listen
We
to
would
this.
never have children if we had.
This is exactly what he's going on to say. The act of having a child, one brings children into the world without knowing whether one will be able to love and provide for their needs throughout a lifetime. Only in actually caring for one's children does one discover and expand one's capacity for love and concern. Human capacities and achievements grow as a result of action and not as a result of noble ideals and well-meaning intentions, like earthly missions. The Hanukkah lamp burned for 8 days because of those who were prepared to have it burn for only 1 day. The 8 days of Hanukkah incorporate the miracle of the first day, which signifies the miracle of man's courage to begin to build within imperfect human situations. There were undoubtedly many people who were skeptical of the decision to light the temple lamp with a single cruse of oil. Why light a flame which is bound to burn out before the temple is completely rededicated? Let the temple remain ritually defiled until we are certain that we have enough oil to light the lamp for a long period. Why initiate a process which we cannot complete? Wait until the conditions are right. Those who went ahead and kindled the lamp ignored such voices of reason and availed themselves of the precious opportunities at hand, and the miracle of Hanukkah occurred. And the second focal point of Hanukkah is the Maccabean victory against the tyranny of Antiochus. The book of Maccabees and the liturgy specific to Hanukkah highlight the Maccabean struggle against religious oppression and emphasize the victory of the few against the many, rather than the miracle of the cruse of oil. The motif of the Maccabean victory on Hanukkah was the source of Jewish heroism in the face of adverse conditions of history. Although they lacked military and political power, Jews identified with the victory of the few against the many, as described in the liturgy in terms of their courage to maintain their commitment to Judaism in spite of religious persecution. And is this not a topic for today? The Maccabean victory and the miracle of the lights are not mutually exclusive reasons, but indicate different emphases. The courage to oppose a cultural monism which threatens to undermine particular differences and thus to destroy the unique character of Jewish identity was a dominant characteristic of Jewish history. Like the spirit of Maccabean revolt, lighting the Hanukkah lamp is a public demonstration of Jewish life in defiance of an ethos which seeks to neutralize individuality and cultural diversity. Now, I just want to touch on a few smaller little points connected to this, just a few more moments. So in the Al Hanisim, we're thanking God for battles. That seems rather odd. Why would we be grateful for that? So excuse me, Rabbi Yaakov Neuberger says, the distressing perspective of recent years has suggested to me that perhaps Chazal, our sages, are directing us to indeed be grateful for the manner in which the Maccabean battles were waged, and certainly the Shushanite struggles. Sadly, we have come to see terrorism, wherever in the world, introduce battles without borders and bring warriors without any price for life to the city street, far off destinations, and all that lies between them. Possibly we as people, wherever we are in the world, because this is happening everywhere, as people can be grateful that if God has seen fit to bring a battle upon us that is similar to the one fought by the Hashmonaim, where war and warriors were clearly depicted. You understand what he's saying? That no war is desired. But at least when we knew where the battlefield was, and we knew who the soldier and who the victim might be, but now it's chaos. It's crazy. So he's trying to give reason. What we're grateful for is that it was set, defined. Just an interesting note. And
Hello? I'm okay, thanks. And you?
Bev,
Good.
Bev. Not gonna hear. Okay, just one other. You know the name Max Nardau? He first encountered Zionism in 1895 when Theodor Herzl was suffering what seemed to be a near delusional obsession with the problem of anti-Semitism. And he was referred to Nordau's medical practice to see a psychiatrist. Well, Nordau, who was also, he had a medical degree, but he was also a known journalist. He became enthralled when he heard Herzl's plan and said, in fact, if you are insane, we are insane together. Count on me. And he developed this idea here of Jewry of muscle or muscular Judaism. And he said at the Second Zionist Congress in 1898, we must think of creating once again a Jewry of muscles. In the narrow Jewish street, our poor limbs soon forgot their gay movements. In the dimness of sunless houses, our eyes began to blink shyly. The fear of constant persecution turned our powerful voices into frightened whispers, which rose in a crescendo only when our martyrs on the stakes cried out their dying prayers in the face of their executioners. But now, all coercion has become a memory of the past, and at last we are allowed space enough for our bodies to live again. Let us take up our oldest traditions. Let us once more become deep-chested, sturdy, sharp-eyed men. And he continued when he wrote a few years later, if, unlike other peoples, we do not conceive of physical life as our highest possession, it is nevertheless very valuable to us and thus worthy of careful treatment. What he's saying there is, we only see our physical well-being as the kemach necessary, as Esther said, for Torah. In order, that's not our raison d'etre. During long centuries, we have not been able to give it such treatment. In the narrow Jewish street, our poor limbs soon forgot their carefree movements. In the dimness of sunless houses, our eyes began to blink shyly. The fear of constant persecution turned our powerful voices into frightened whispers. At this point, he developed his ideas for changing the situation. Let us take up our oldest traditions. Let us once more become deep-chested, again he repeats, sturdy, sharp-eyed men. For no other people will gymnastics fulfill a more educational purpose than for us Jews. It shall straighten us in body and in character. Our new muscle Jews have not yet regained the heroism our forefathers, who in large numbers eagerly entered the sports arenas in order to take part in competition and to pit themselves against the highly trained Hellenistic athletes.
But Bracha, I have a bit of a problem with that, because to me,
Why?
there is a difference between the physical and the spiritual. There are certain things that we can see. I can see your hands, I can see your legs, I can see your nose. I can't see your brain. I can't see God. So here comes the belief above. So the muscles and our physical thing is not enough for us to have the vision of what we're going to do, because some things we can't see. We can feel them, but we can't see them.
I'm not sure I'm fully grasping what you're trying to say. Here, what he's saying,
He's talking about developing the muscle. He's talking about
that's as a response, that's as a response to the lack of ability that we had for so very long in not being able to
but
use our bodies actively.
But I'm saying it's not enough, because
No. But he said that, Esther. He said that when he said that it's
then I'm sorry.
not our highest possession. It's not our highest possession, but it's very valuable and we need it. We can't live as angels in heavenly. We have our earthly missions. And in order to do that, you have to have, and that's why
But you have to have the
oil and the military victories go hand in hand, because we have to initiate, we have to be involved, but we do this as a partner with the miracle worker God.
Then I agree, because the physical
you
is not
agree.
enough. Yeah, the physical is not enough. You have
No,
to
no.
have vision.
Now, Bracha, can we say it's
Bracha.
inappropriate?
I think that the muscles that he's talking about are not just the physical. I mean, when you pair him up with Herzl and what was going on in the beginnings of Zionism, those are also the muscles of Zionism, of the future of building our country. I don't think he's talking purely of the physical at all.
No. It's as a basis for being able to survive, continue to reach the heights. Anyone else?
Is it not inappropriate to dichotomize physical versus spiritual? In essence, that if we believe God empowers us in both realms and they go together, maybe that's part of the partnership you speak about.
Absolutely.
I
You
agree.
need both. God gave us bodies. And much spirituality you can't have without that body.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand. I'm sorry, I'm using a physical, but they definitely do.
Yeah, but the spirit needs the body. The spirit lives in the body.
That's right. So you
I
know
have a
that Rabbi
question.
Hillel.
I have a question,
Hillel.
Bracha. Oh,
Yeah, let me just
going-
finish this. Rabbi Hillel one day is leaving the study hall and his students ask him where he's going, and he says he's going to the bathhouse, and they're in shock that he would be going to a place like that. And he says, this is a very special, important vessel that I have to take care of to be able to do God's work. Yes.
my question is, start going back to the beginning of today's class, Jacob versus Esau. You talked about gifts, etc. I'm not that familiar with the text. Was there anything that would be akin to a verbal apology, oral, verbal, rather than gathering a bunch of material things? Does the Torah speak about that?
No, what they were interested in those days and what were the gifts that he was giving was sheep and cattle. Because
All material.
that's what
It's
people were interested in.
material. Where are words of regret? Words.
No, well, I
You know
think,
that movie, My Fair Lady, words, words, words. I've heard enough words. Give me the cattle and the sheep.
give me
Right.
action, don't give me words.
Maybe he was too sheepish to give words.
Oh, okay.
Elliot,
I love playing with words, but when you really get down to it, isn't everything we do, or to a large extent, about words and how they're interpreted?
Absolutely.
It's all about words. Hopefully
It
not
is.
Narishkeit.
there is nothing wrong with Narishkeit, Elliot.
Well, two of you can talk about that. It's have a good week, everybody. And we'll continue Shavua Ba.
Thank
There's
you.
no-
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah, Yashra Koach. Have a great week.